Good morning, everyone. This is Jeannie, Keith, and I'm going to start the meeting today. Glad that you're all joining us for our final state and federal programs meeting this year. So if you'd go to the next slide, please, Adrian. Thank you. Today, we're going to cover the LCAP submission and approval process and provide some reminders for you. Adrian is going to share the federal programs monitoring update. And we also have a year-end survey where we're going to collect some information about how to best support you in the upcoming year and to learn about what's been helpful and what time frame might be the most appropriate for you in the coming year. And then we have a section on Title I supplement, not supplant, and an update on the consolidated application that we will finish up the meeting with, and Bonnie will be providing those updates. So if you go to the next slide, please. We'll follow the same process as we have in previous meetings. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll monitor your questions and respond to them as much as we can at this time, but as you know, we like to provide thorough responses and ensure accuracy and detail in those responses. So we'll also follow up with a Q&A. And for the Q&A documents from previous meetings, you can find them on our state and federal program directors meeting, and you can also find today's meeting resources on our website, and I think they're also included in the chat. So we'll move on to the LCAP section, and today Rachel, myself, and Helen will be providing information about the LCAP submission and the approval process. So moving into the next slide, slide provides a resource that's called the District Pre-Review Tool. And we wanted to remind districts of the review tools provided to support them in addressing the requirements in each of the LCAP sections. So this district pre-review tool addresses all of the sections for a complete LCAP and the requirements for each section. In this screenshot, you can see just the first sections, but the tool is not limited to just these first sections. So what you see here is the budget overview for parents, the one-time supplement template, and the beginning of the complete LCAP template that is starting with the plan summary section. And this tool, which we've shared with each of our districts, addresses all of the required sections, including the 5 action tables that come at the end of the LCAP template. So we have, as many of you know, met with districts to remind them that the specific information noted in the tool on the left-hand side reflects the instructions in the LCAP template. For one of the approval requirements, what is included in the response must address all of what is requested in the instructions. And be reminded, these instructions come at the back of the LCAP template. There's more in the instructions at the back of the LCAP template than there is in the forward-facing template. That's what you see when you're actually reading the LCAP. For example, the success section in the plan summary needs to include successes based on the LEA's review of state and local performance indicators, progress toward LCAP goals, local self-assessment tools, and input from educational partners. We remind you that it may be helpful to organize your response using the key components included in the instructions, so it is clear that the response is addressing all that is included in the instructions. Another example I wanted to share highlights the key components included in the instructions in the new goal analysis prompt. The first prompt requires a description of overall implementation of the actions to achieve the articulated goal, including relevant challenges, successes, and anywhere where an action was not implemented in the manner in which it was planned. And so the reason I'm sharing this particular piece is some of the responses that we have reviewed in pre-review have not included each of the 4 components. It should be clear what actually was implemented, what were the successes, what were the challenges, and if something was implemented substantively differently, that should be noted. So in using the review tool, we really suggest that you look at those keywords and use them when you're organizing your response. Another reminder is for program and business office to ensure there's alignment between the budget overview for parents, increased or improved services section, and the action tables. And we encourage you to reach out to our business advisory services consultants with questions that you have about budget information that you're including in each of these sections to ensure that there is alignment. And if we can go to the next slide. The next slide displays the charter school reflection tool. And we provided 2 office hours for charter schools where we shared this reflection tool, and so that charter schools might consider using this to review the requirements in each of the LCAP sections. And one of the areas where the requirements vary for charter schools is, as you know, if they're using the LCAP as the SPSA. And you'll see in this review tool that this option is addressed in the section for engaging educational partners. And so if the charter schools using the LCAP as the SPSA, they are required to consult with, if they're not using the LCAP as the SPSA, they're required to consult with teachers, principals, administrators, other school personnel, parents, and students in developing the LCAP. And you'll see each of those required groups listed in the self-review tool. There are other consultation requirements that apply to school districts and only apply to charter schools if the charter school is using the LCAP as the SPSA. And these components are highlighted in the review tool. This can be confusing and has, we've received a lot of questions about it. So we encourage you to reflect on the section in the Engaging Educational Partners section to ensure that you're addressing all of the requirements for consultation in the case that the charter school is using the LCAP as the SPSA. Additionally, the tool includes that a reference to Education Code 47606.5 which states that the governing body of a charter school must hold a public hearing to adopt the LCAP on or before July 1st, and must hold at least one public hearing to solicit recommendations and comments of members of the public regarding specific actions and expenditures proposed to be included in the LCAP. The CDE has indicated that this does not have to be done as at two separate meetings, as is the case with school district. So this means that a charter school, that the governing body of a charter school may solicit recommendations and comments from members of the public and adopt the LCAP at the same public hearing. And these components are addressed in the engaging educational partners section. So moving on to the next slide. We are providing this visual to remind LEAs of all of the components required to be included in a complete LCAP. And the slide displays the order in which the LCAP document is required to be assembled as one document. So the budget overview for parents template is first. Second is the supplement to the annual update template. And we remind you that this supplement to the annual update template is only the template with the 5 responses that were presented to the board in the winter. This does not include any additional materials that you may have included in your board presentation. So it's just the required template with the 5 responses. Next is the LCAP template, including the narrative responses in each section, followed by the 5 action tables, and finally the LCAP instructions. And there's a reminder at the top that all of the components included in the complete LCAP must be posted on the LEA's website. And on the next slide, we provide a reminder of the approval criteria. And the first one is adherence to the template. And what this requires is addressing all of the instructions that are included at the back of the template. And so as I shared with you those couple examples, using the components in the review tool, those components directly match what is included in the instructions. And so for each section, all of the instructions must be addressed. Component number 2 is sufficient expenditures in the budget to implement all LCAP actions. Okay. So the budget must reflect enough funds to implement the actions that are included in the LCAP. The adherence to the expenditure requirements requires the required descriptions for the use of the additional funds, the proportional increase in funding based on the number and concentration of ELs, low income, and foster youth. And the final requirement, which is newly included in the education code, is adherence to the required calculations. And these required calculations are included in the action tables, which include for the first time the carryover table. And now I'm going to turn it over to Helen, and she's going to address the steps for local board adoption and the submission process for the LCAP for LEAs and charter schools.
Thank you, Jeannie. Good morning, everyone. So the LEA's local governing board holds a public hearing for both the LCAP and the budget, and thereafter at a separate public meeting that is held after but not on the same day as the public hearing, the governing board adopts the LCAP and the budget on or before July 1st, 2022. After the board adoption, the LEA must submit the LCAP to the county office, in our case, our LACO, no later than 5 days after the adoption. The county office will review for approval. And as a reminder, LEAs and charters must submit the board-adopted LCAP to LACO through the LACO's LCAP system. Next slide, please. As mentioned in the previous slide, all LEAs and charter schools in LA County will submit their LCAP 22-23 LCAP using LACO's LCAP system. If your LEA does not use the LACO's LCAP system to develop your LCAP, then you will upload a PDF of your complete LCAP, as Jeannie mentioned in the earlier slide, which includes the budget overview for parents, the supplement to the annual update, the 22-23 LCAP, the action tables, and the LCAP instructions. The PDF that gets uploaded should be one single file with all those components included in that specific order. To upload a PDF of your complete LCAP for non-LCAP users, first, you need to log into the LCAP system. Or if you don't already have an account, then you need to register as a new user at elcap.laco.edu. Once you're in the system, you'll click on Manage Plans, which is located on the left menu bar under LCAP. Next slide, please. So on this screen, you'll select the orange button that says Add New Plan. Complete all the required fields on the title page, then upload a PDF of the completed 22-23 LCAP at the bottom of the title page. At the bottom of the title page, you'll need to click on the box that says, do you want to use the PDF plan upload? And this will allow you to choose your file to upload. Once you've selected your file, then you will click on the green cloud button to upload the file. Once the upload completes and you've confirmed that the file name replaces the Choose File button, you can click the Save button. Very important, click the Save button. Then you are ready to submit the plan. Next slide, please. The final step is to submit the plan. So next you'd go back to the plan index where you'll see an orange button that says Submit. At the top of the screen, you'll click this button to officially submit the plan to LACO. Please do not click the submit button for any pre-reviews. For pre-reviews, email the PDF of the draft to your assigned LCAP coordinator. And please remember, the pre-review process is for the school districts only. Once the plan is submitted, your superintendent will receive an email request to authorize the submission of the plan. Now I'll turn it over to Rachel for the LCAP approval process.
Thank you, Helen. Hello, everyone. So Education Code 52070 provides the requirements and the timeline for the LCAP approval process for school districts. And so this approval process timeline slide really just applies to school districts because county offices just review school district LCAPs. So as mentioned, the LCAP must be adopted by the local governing board by July 1st, and then submitted to the county office within 5 days of adoption. The review and approval process begins following the submission of the board adopted LCAP. So on or before August 15th, the County Office of Education may request clarification in writing. The district must then respond in writing to the request for clarification within 15 days. Then within 15 days of receiving the response from the district, the County Office of Education may provide recommendations in writing for amendments to the LCAP. The district must then consider the recommendations in a public meeting within 15 days of receiving the recommendations. The deadline for the County Office of Education to approve the LCAP is October 8th. And it's also important to note that the district's budget cannot be approved until the LCAP is approved. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, all LEAs must post their board adopted LCAP on their website. And so this slide highlights the applicable education codes related to the posting requirements for both school districts and charter schools. So for both school districts and charter schools, the LCAP must be posted as one single document with all of the required components and in the order that Jeannie shared on slide 21. And so again, as previously shared, the budget overview for parents will be first, then the supplement to the annual update, the LCAP template, the action tables, and finally the LCAP template instructions. It's also important to note that school districts are also required to post on the district's website the LCAPs of any charter schools authorized by the school district. And that's per Education Code 52065A. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to remind you that the 21-22 local indicators must be presented to the local governing board as a non-consent item at the same meeting in which the LCAP is adopted. This slide provides an overview of the local indicators that are required for school districts and charters. There are 2 additional local indicators required for county offices that are not shown on the slide. So the CDE developed self-reflection tools for LEAs to use to report its progress on the local performance indicator to its educational partners and the public. And the self-reflection tools are available on the CDE Local Indicators webpage, and you can find the link to that at the bottom of this slide. LEAs may also want to consider using those self-reflection tools as a resource when reporting the local indicator results to its local governing board. So for priority 1, LEAs measure its progress in meeting the Williams settlement requirements, which includes appropriately assigned teachers, access to curriculum-aligned instructional materials, and safe, clean, and functional school facilities. The performance indicator includes data required as part of the School Accountability Report Card, or SARC. With regards to the teacher data, we wanted to note that we are still awaiting the release of the teacher misassignment data file from CDE. And this file will contain the 2020-21 teacher misassignments originally reported through CalSAS, but reevaluated based on the federal definitions for misassigned teachers. And CDE has indicated that they plan to release this file in the late spring. So it should be coming soon. Beginning with the reporting of the 2022 dashboard, the CDE will pre-populate the teacher assignment portion of the priority 1 local indicator. So if this data is available in time, it should be used for the 2022-23 LCAP and also for the presentation of this local indicator to the local governing board. However, if this data is not available in time, LEAs can either defer on reporting the data until it is released or reuse last year's 2020-21 CalSAS data. And note that the CDE will be releasing a teacher data file for 2020-21 that may differ from these numbers due to the definitions of misassignment that are being applied. So again, It will be really important to communicate to your educational partners that this data will look different in the 2022 dashboard because the CDE will apply the federal definitions for misassigned teachers. For priority 2, LEAs have the option of providing a narrative summary of their progress in the implementation of state academic standards based on locally selected measures or tools. Or LEAs may complete a self-reflection tool survey. For priority 3, parent and family engagement, LEAs complete a self-reflection tool that addresses 3 areas of parent and family engagement. And this tool includes a narrative as well as a rating scale for each of the 3 areas. For priority 6, school climate, LEAs provide a narrative summary of the local administration and analysis of a local climate survey that captures a valid measure of student perceptions of school safety and connectedness in at least 1 grade level within the grade span. And then finally, for priority 7, access to a broad course of study, LEAs provide a narrative summary of the extent to which all students have access to and are enrolled in a broad course of study. One last related reminder that we wanted to share is that in August, there will be a dashboard coordinator reset, and the CDE will be sending communication about this reset to superintendents. So be sure to let your superintendent know to be on the lookout for this email in August. The dashboard local indicator reporting window is currently scheduled to be open between August 22nd and September 30th. But like everything else, this is subject to change. And more information will be forthcoming once received. That concludes my section, so I will now turn it over to Adrienne.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to take a look at some FPM updates for the 22-23 school year. Once again, here is a list of the districts and charter schools that have been selected for an FPM review for next year. And the column on the left are the Cycle A districts that will be conducting an on-site review. And on the right side, we have the districts and charters that have been identified in Cycle C that will be receiving an online review. So you can kind of take a look and see, again, if you, I'm sure you all know, but at least, sorry, you're being reminded one more time. So now what's next? CDE stated that in late May, but probably most likely in June, as we are coming towards the end of May, the information will be released to the school districts and charters regarding the specific details of your review, including in this will be the dates of the review, the schools being reviewed, and the specific programs that will be reviewed during your visit. In June, we have the program monitoring instruments that will be released, and these are for everyone, and they will be posted on CDE's website. And then in August, there will be a virtual training, and it is scheduled for August 2nd through the 5th. And the time, it'll be many sessions, and the time will be about 9 a.m. to 4:30. But again, the schedule will be coming out about, they said 45 days before this event. So maybe middle of June, end of June. So as a reminder, once those instruments are released, everyone should be able to access the instruments. And so here is what it looks like in the compliance monitoring webpage. And you can see the arrow pointing to the program instruments. Once you click on this, you will see this. And currently it shows the 21-22 program instruments and also last year's 2021. So they always keep both, and that's helpful because once this is updated in June, you'll see in the first one, you'll see the 22-23 program instruments, and then the 21-22 will be below it. And so at this time, this is where you would compare the two years of instruments. And what you're looking for is to see, are there any changes? And how, if there are changes, how do you notify others of these changes? And does this change affect any of your systems that are in place or any of your internal controls? You know, we saw a couple of years ago in the equipment inventory items in the instruments, they had added some columns of necessary information that needed to be included in your district inventory list. And so what we saw was that people had not updated their list, or they had not told their logistics or whoever maintains that list that they needed to include those vital pieces of information. And so that led to findings during an FPM review. And so these are things that are needed to know upfront, and also to adjust your internal controls and your systems and processes that you have in place. So as we look at planning for the 22-23 school year, it is important to take advantage of the summer months. So one, you need to identify within your district what needs to be monitored. And so here is a list of many sources where you can find out what the requirements are. You can look at, I'm going to do a plug here for our LACO compliance checklist. And we've included the link for you to, and the order form for the compliance checklist. And these are given, sent out monthly with the federal requirements and all the compliance requirements for each level of district level, as well as the school site level. So these are really helpful, and we want to make sure that you get your order form in for the 22-23 school year. Also, at our meetings, we provide a previous frequent non-compliant items from the past reviews, as well as current reviews. So sometimes there are things that pop up in the current FPM reviews that seem to be kind of an issue that is commonly, a common finding. So again, our meetings are helpful in kind of highlighting that and putting it on your radar. And of course, everyone should be looking at the instruments, because this is the evidence that will be required to be gathered and collected and uploaded. Areas of CDE focus, again, for the current year: consolidated application. In there are all the components that you are uploading. The legal assurances, those again, as you look at all those many legal assurances, there are a lot of detail in that. So it's important to see what's required. Legal requirements for the programs that are contained in the CONAP. There's guidance, instructions, details on specific requirements, such as carryover, private school reservations, indirect cost limits. All of those need to be embedded within your system and monitored. And then, of course, USDE provides the guidance documents that come out. And if, any grant applications usually will have the compliance requirements embedded in that. So again, these are some things that you can do during your summertime as you double check to make sure that you have systems and processes in place, so that if you are selected for an FPM, it's just a matter of gathering the evidence and reducing that stress and during that intense time. And so that is it for now. I'm going to turn it over to Debbie.
Good morning, everyone. I just have quick information for you that we will be sending out our end of year survey to our listserv participants. And this survey, of course, just like you get your educational partners' feedback, this is our opportunity to listen to you and get your feedback as far as how we can best support you. Questions regarding timeline, meeting format, Zoom or in person, relevant topics, and then also frequency of meeting, And then we'll also give you an opportunity to just like a free response if you have any information that you really would like us to know or feedback. So we will be sending these out via email to our listserv. So be looking out for those. They'll be coming in the next week or two. Thank you. I'm going to turn that over to Bonnie.
All right. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, team. I don't know if you all out there know it, but you just saw an example of amazing teamwork. Yes, I had a flat tire on the way in this morning, and instead of stressing, I knew the team was there and picked it up and did a beautiful job. Those of you who work with amazing teams know what a blessing it is. So thank you, and lucky me to have such a great team to work with. And I have to say, every time something like this happens to me, which happens to us all the time, and it's an inconvenience, but what it makes me think about is our children and our families, and how something like that is relatively minor to us, although it doesn't seem minor, it can be a big thing for them. For example, do they have the $400 it takes to replace a tire? And can they afford that? And do they have an employer that would be understanding and give them time and benefits that allow them not to be docked in their pay for something that happens? So it just seems like every time I think, and those of you who grew up maybe in situations less fortunate than you have now, I think might think about that sometimes when things happen to you, like, wow, this feels bad, but I can take care of it. What about our children? What about our families? And that's why we have programs like Title I that pushes the money to our highest poverty schools. That's why LCFF funding formula is about supporting the needs of low-income children. And my hat's just off to you for all you do every day to support those children. So, so maybe there's a message in everything that happens. All right, so having said that, I want to take a look at the Title I methodology. And the reason for that is last month we looked at how you allocate funds out to Title I school sites. So this month we wanted to take a look at and just kind of remind folks of the requirement for supplement, not supplant in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is different than what we've had in the past. And it has to do with school allocations and having a methodology for allocating state and local funds to schools in a manner that is neutral. And we'll talk about that. Title I neutral allocating funds. What does that mean? And what do you need to have in place? So let's take a look at the next slide. And the next slide is just about supplement, not supplant in general. So all federal ESEA, or now ESSA programs, Title I, II, III, and IV, all of them have a supplement, not supplant provision. And why is that? Well, it's to ensure that your federal investments have a meaningful impact on students they're designed to serve. And so there's a requirement that these funds supplement and do not supplant your state and local sources for educating those children. Why? Because without that requirement, federal dollars could simply be used to replace your state and local dollars that would otherwise be made available. And this comes from guidance that was recently put out by, well, not so recently, that was put out by the U.S. Department of Education. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Next slide is about how we test supplanting. And the test for supplanting is what has changed for Title I, not the requirement. And that's important to keep in mind. Supplement, not supplant is still a requirement, but how we test it has changed only for Title I. So let's take a look at the audit test that we had previously. So previously, the audit test for all federal programs was that there was a presumption that supplanting was taking place if you were paying for something with federal funds that are required by federal, state, or local law. The presumption is if it's a legal requirement, you're going to do it. And you're going to do it with your local funds. If you didn't have federal funds, you'd still pay for that. So it's a presumption. The second presumption is if you paid for it with state or local funds in the prior year. The presumption again being if it was a good service and you paid for it with your local funds, why wouldn't you keep paying for it? And so those two raised a question. When we say a presumption can be overcome. There can be a way you can defend that, but an auditor, and previously in the audit guide, the auditor would ask those questions. What's the presumption? And now you need to show why that isn't supplanting. For Title I, there was an additional presumption, and that was that if you provided the same service to Title I students with Title I funds that you were paying for other students with state and local funds, that was a presumption of supplanting. Why aren't you giving all the kiddos the same thing? Why are you using Title I funds for that? That was a presumption under under NCLB and under everything in ESEA since it practically had started. So under ESSA, the first two tests continue to apply to Title II, III, and IV. They're still, and if you look even on the Title II website, you'll see it listed there. If it's required by state, federal, or local law, there's a presumption you're supplanting with those programs. If it was paid for with state or local funds in the prior year, there's still that presumption remains. Title III, those of you who work with it know there's an additional requirement that supplement, not supplant, applies not only to state and local, but to federal funds. So all that remains for those programs. So what's changed? Title I has changed. Under ESSA, the supplement, not supplant requirement for Title I didn't change, but the test changed. So let's take a look at the next slide. This is just a screenshot of the guidance that describes what the methodology should look like that districts use. And this is available in our handouts on our website with the other handouts for today, but it's also available on the U.S. Department of Education website. So let's just dig into it just a little bit and what's in the guidance. We won't go into it totally in depth, but enough to give you an idea what you might want to look at further. So the three fiscal cornerstones of Title I remain. They haven't changed, okay? And this is in the revised supplement. So maintenance of effort is a district level requirement, and it is calculated and reviewed at the state level. That means the district needs to maintain fiscal effort from year to year, and if they reduce it more than 90%, more than 10%, so it's a 90% threshold, then all your federal programs can be reduced by whatever percentage you missed maintenance of effort. Sometimes when there have been extenuating circumstances, there are waivers. I'm sure things like fires and such may cause those, but typically maintenance of effort, you're notified by the state if you don't meet maintenance of effort. Comparability is done at the district level. And that is that's what you do every year in October or sometime in the fall. You make sure that your services taken as a whole are comparable between Title I and non-Title I schools. So the final one, supplement, not supplant, is the third cornerstone, and it requires now LEAs to distribute state and local funds to schools without taking into account the school's participation in Title I. So let's look at the next slide and look at supplement, not supplant. So the guidance clarifies that the general supplement, not supplant requirement is largely unchanged from the past. Okay? But to demonstrate compliance now, an LEA has to demonstrate that their methodology that they use for allocating state and local funds to each of their schools that gets Title I is such that that school receives all the state and local funds it would otherwise receive if it didn't get Title I funds. And this is consistent with the purpose of supplement, not supplant, that school should get all the funds it would have gotten. You don't say, well, they're getting Title I funds, they can pay for all these things with Title I and we'll just take that money away from them. No. Your methodology has to describe how you're ensuring those schools get the same funding they would get, and the Title I is on top of it. All right, so let's take a look at the fiscal test on the next slide. And under ESSA, compliance with the supplement, not supplant rule is not based on an analysis of individual expenditures. And this is what I think our heads are tuned into. And we still get questions about this, what you can do. And there are requirements we'll take a look at about that. but we've leaned on supplement, not supplant as the only requirement for allowable costs. There are many others. But in terms of supplements, not supplant, you're not looking at the individual expenditures. Instead, you're looking at the demonstration of the methodology used to allocate the funds to make sure those schools are not getting shortchanged in terms of their funding. Okay, so keep in mind, supplement, not supplant still exists. It's still a requirement. The test is different, and it is only one of many tests for allowability. All right, the next slide is just a reminder. Now, not all the funds that a district receives for services to schools are allocated directly to schools. Sometimes you have programs that you operate at the district level, and you have a new project or something, some things that you do that are all the funds that are retained at the district level, and you just provide the services. So in this case, the same thing applies. They also have to meet, an LEA also has to meet this methodology determination regarding funds that you retain at the local level. And at the LEA level, in this case, it's going to look a lot like the previous supplement, not supplant, because you're looking at specific expenditure determinations. In other words, if you have a district-wide program, are you equally providing those services and that funding to all schools, even though it's not directly allocated? Okay, so accordingly, whenever there's you have an LEA-wide initiative for any purpose, anything at all, you need to stop and think. Am I making sure that the non-federal funds are used neutrally and distributed, and then Title I funds are supplemental to those funds and used for Title I purposes? So again, two places you need to look: school allocation methodology and what are you doing at the district level. All right, so let's look at Title I neutral. Okay, well, before we go there, sorry, why was that changed? Why did we go from the old system to the new? And it really came out of some concerns, and we get questions on this periodically about that innovation was inhibited by the previous methodology and those three tests, and particularly the ones about using funds in the prior year. That happened because you might have a really innovative program, and a school might try something, and your Title I school says, we want to use our Title I funds to do this whoop bang wonderful program that's going to really support our low achieving kids. And it's wonderful. And then you have other schools that want to do the same thing. And in the past, that was problematic, because then they would say, well, now you have to pay for that activity at the Title I school, as well as all your schools out of district funds. And that became problematic for a district that wanted to say, well, we would like to continue this, but do we have to change those funding sources? Now what they're saying is, under the methodology, you could still have, the school could still pay for it with Title I, but it's going to be a bit of a red flag, because a reviewer or an auditor is going to say, okay, now show me how they're getting additional money, and they may use it for something different, but they still need to get the money that they would have spent on that program. So it gives you a little bit of freedom, but it doesn't give you the freedom to take the money away, just that the actual expenditure might be the same. So you might say, okay, if they pay for it with Title I, that's fine, but where's that money, and what are they using the additional Title I money for? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. That was kind of it. And I know we get questions. Well, I did this last year. Can I do it? Well, maybe, if you're ensuring those Title I schools are still getting that additional funding. All right, next slide is Title I neutral, I believe. And what does that mean? Well, and this is there's FAQs in the guidance that I shared with you. And how do you determine it's Title I neutral? Well, what they mean, a Title I neutral methodology, that it doesn't consider Title I status. Okay, so by definition, it doesn't reduce state and local funds to a Title I school, because it doesn't use Title I status when allocating schools. So if your business office is looking at the funding for your schools and saying, well, they get Title I, so we'll just decide not to put quite as much money in there, or what they could do it with Title I, that is not Title I neutral. Okay, so you need to make sure however your funds are allocated is Title I neutral. Your current methodology may be just fine. If that's how you've been allocating schools with a Title I neutral policy, your current, you may not have to come up with anything. You may not need a different kind of methodology. There's no standard methodology that anyone has to use. The state can't mandate a methodology. You just have to ensure that you can prove that what you're doing is Title I neutral. All right. Another piece in the Q&A that's important had to do with mandated services. And so, must a school receive state and local funds necessary to provide mandated services for students with disabilities and English learners? So if it's required by law for those students, do you have to make sure your Title I schools get it? And absolutely yes. Okay, they require that a Title I school gets all your state and local funds that you need to meet all required services that are legally mandated for children with disabilities and English learners. So services regarding their IEP, regarding FAPE, services for English learners under Lau v. Nichols, those things, civil rights requirements, schools need to get those funds provided to them with state and local funds, and that needs to be allocated equitably to all your schools. Next has to do with documentation. And do you have to maintain documentation? And they're saying, yes, you need to maintain documentation to show how you're complying with the program and to facilitate an effective audit. So you need documentation of your allocation, your methodology, how you're doing it, and then you need documentation to show that how you actually did it. And FPM will ask to see your books to see how funds go out to schools. And speaking of FPM, I think the next slide takes a look at the FPM instrument. Your fiscal monitoring instrument, fiscal monitoring item 3 includes a review of your methodology. So what they're going to ask you, documentation showing that state and local funds were allocated to school sites equitably in the fiscal year, whatever year they're reviewing, and it should demonstrate that federal funds were supplemental to that state and state and local funding. And so the reviewer is going to ask you which year they're looking for, and then they're going to ask you to pull up documentation, not only to show you had a methodology, but to show the money that went out to schools. And how did that happen? Did you follow your methodology? So it's not just having it, but you've got to follow it and prove that you followed it. All right. All right, next is allowability. Just wanted to, and in the guidance, they address this. And they say the Title I funds have to be used only for allowable activities, given that you're not required to demonstrate that individual costs are supplemental. And the answer is yes. ESSA requires that you can only use it for allowable costs, even if you comply with supplement, not supplant. You still have to spend your funds on allowable costs, and the type of program determines what's allowable. You have school-wide programs and targeted programs have separate rules, so you need to follow that. And also they reference the cost principles in the Uniform Administrative Requirements. And then let's take a look at what those are. I'm just going to give you a list so you know it's long. All right. Allocable to be the cost principles include some that you're very familiar with. Necessary and reasonable. All right. That's one of the cost principles. Is the cost necessary for implementation of the Title I program? And is it reasonable cost? In other words, are you paying an excessive amount? It needs to be treated consistently as direct or indirect costs. In other words, your district can't charge if they take something as an indirect cost. They can't charge it as a direct cost to Title I. Whatever they do for other programs, they have to treat your Title I the same. It needs to be determined in accordance with GAAP, and that just means you follow accounting principles that are generally accepted. Net of applicable credits means if you get if something comes back, you get a rebate or something, that doesn't go into the general fund. A rebate for something from Title I, the rebate goes back to the Title I program. Not include, you can't include it as a matching cost. You need to have it adequately documented. You know that for review. It can't be illegal, okay? You can't do something that's not prohibited under state or local law. It needs to be in conformance with, exclusion, okay, award terms, conditions. Essentially, it needs to follow all the requirements of the Title I program in conformance with federal laws, award terms and conditions. So that's the condition of Title I. What are the requirements? Consistent with your policies, regulations, and procedures that apply to both federal awards and other activities. You can't treat federal funds differently from your other funds. You can't say, well, we could buy something really expensive. We wouldn't normally do it, but it's Title I. Can't do that. If your policy says you have to get the best cost, you've got to get the best cost for all of them. On the next slide, I think there are even more of those. No, these are, I'm sorry. Did we go back? Yeah. Okay. It comes from, forgive me, this comes from the CDE website. There are even more information, and this is, and I have to give kudos to Adrienne. She always takes us back to this page on the CDE website that provides you with allowable use for Title I funds. And you can see, in addition to the cost principles, they look, is it aligned to academic content standards, evidence-based? Again, they reference the federal administrative regulations, reasonable, necessary, allocable. Allocable means you can show it benefits the program. You spend the money, you can show this is how it supports the program. It's supplemental, and they're saying Title I funds should be used in the current or the subsequent fiscal year, and that has to do with your carryover requirements. Next, on that page, it goes specifically into targeted and school-wide, and school-wide has more, so we went, just shared that one. Again, it's got to be based on a comprehensive needs assessment. It needs to be in your school plan. It needs to be approved by the governing board. It needs to be evaluated and monitored annually by your school site council, and reviewed and approved and recommended by the SSC to the local governing board. So just to point out, there's lots more than supplement, not supplant. Supplement, not supplant has been simplified to some degree, but make sure you have that methodology in place, and that you can document that you're getting the funds out equitably, and it's Title I neutral allocation, and that you're also meeting all the allowability requirements. So let's move on to more exciting things, the consolidated application. Just want to give you an update and a few reminders. As you know, it's been delayed. So let's take a look at the timeline on the next slide. So it's delayed. What we hear is sometime after July 1. I'm hearing rumors that it could be delayed into July, maybe into August. Fingers crossed that's not the case, but it's going to be due approximately 6 weeks after the release. So stay tuned, watch your emails for updates on that. We have seen nothing, but are hearing some troublesome rumors. And of course, everything seems to be delayed between CalPads and everything else, so I wouldn't be surprised. There's been some concern about board approval, and just for those of you that may not have been around for a few years, board approval date, generally they allow you to have a board approval date after your submission date. So you can submit it with a delayed board approval date, but it can be no later than August 31st. And that is because CDE takes the consolidated applications to the State Board of Education, usually in November for approval, and that's to allow them to get the money out to you folks. And so that's usually what they've had, the August 31st. So typically that's been the date. So I would shoot for, if you have any board date in board approval, board meeting in August, you might at least tentatively calendar that for that month. Then just a reminder, last year, I don't know why it's been delayed. I just think everything seems to be. I'm not sure if it has to do with CalPads, they're adding anything. I've heard nothing. But last year, and I was just reminded of this, the delay in submission could impact the timeline for your apportionments, and it probably won't impact most of you, but just want to give you a heads up. Last year, some of you found that you submitted your CONAP. Remember, it was late last year also. So you submitted it, but you submitted it by the deadline. But then you went in and looked on the CDE website, and it was showing your CONAP is not certified. And the reason for that was on the fiscal office has different timelines in the program office, and they're not quite lined up. So the concern is that if it gets in even by the CDE's CONAP submission date, it could miss the deadline for the fiscal office to allow you to allocate the funds. The good news is, this was not good news in some cases, but the good news is most of you have carryover this year, at least enough that's going to carry you through the first few months of the year until they can get the allocation straightened out. So your carryover, usually most years, you don't get the new year's money until you've spent prior year's money. So many of you are still working on prior year's funding. So just be aware of that. If you go in and look and you don't show that could happen. So these are all maybe things just to give you scary stuff to think about as if you didn't have enough, but shouldn't impact your funding. All right, let's take a look at what's in the application. Okay, so the application includes your application for funding and your year-end reporting. The application for funding is where you check the boxes what you want to participate in. So which programs are you going to, just got basically the 4 programs, but which federal programs you're going to participate in. There's also legal assurances that you have to assign, the protected prayer, and there's one other legal assurance in there. But there's a couple assurances that there's a lot of legal assurances for all the programs, but then there's the other one is the LCAP. You say PAP, that should say LCAP. There's an assurance for your LCAP federal addendum that and your LCAP that you have an approved LCAP, and they're asking for last year's submission because that was the first year of a 3-year submission. So we'll send those dates out to you and let you know what the dates are for that. But anyway, those are basically, and then for Title III, they give you estimated allocations, and they ask for a very general Title III budgets for EL and immigrant funds. So those first few items make up the application for funding. It's recommended that you certify those as quickly as possible, because once those are certified, the rest are reports. And so if you certify your application for funding, they may be able to move your funding through a little quicker. So you can certify, and those will be easy to certify. They're just check boxes. Title I Part D, that's our county office friends, and there's a whole lot of reporting for them, so be grateful. Most of you don't have to do it. Private school consultation is included in there, so make sure you've consulted with all your private schools, because you have to document that you've done that and which schools are participating in all the programs, so that's included. Private school students served, you'll need to report that for your programs for 21-22. Your homeless policy, make sure you've got that in place. Review it from last year, the things they're asking, who's your liaison, and has your liaison had training? Is your liaison providing training? There's a lot in the homeless policy. The other thing you need to prepare your fiscal people for, don't let them go on vacation, okay, is you've got expenditure reports for 18-19, 19-20, and 20-21. So you're going to have those that seems further back. Let me double check that. Seems like it should start with 19-20, 20-21. Yeah. Yes. Hopefully 18-19 is over. All right. 19-20, 20-21, 21-22. The last 3 years, let's put it that way. You have expenditure reports. So those will be included. Let's take a look the next slide, just a few reminders. Yes, here we go. You have some money that will be expiring in September 30th of this year. So particularly for consolidated application programs, Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. This year, we have 2 years worth of funding that is ending the period of availability, and that is because we had a waiver in 1920 that allowed you to retain those funds. So now we have 1920 funds, 2021 funds. Both of those are coming to the end of the 27-month expenditure period on September 30th. That means those funds need to be obligated by that time. So you might want to go into the CDE website, look at the fiscal reports and see how you're doing, and are those funds being expended, and do you have plans to get them obligated by September 30th. So if you have summer programs, whatever, you need to make sure that those funds get spent by that time. And then you're looking back for 2 years. You have carryover for Title I Part A for this year, 15% carryover, but for these funds, they totally expire and go back to the Treasury if they're not spent. So really important to check those dollars. Also, if you're not seeing the funds showing up as expended, but you think you have, check with your business office and see if they're reporting it through the cash management, CMDC, okay? And you want to make sure if it's not reported, you have a new reporting period starting July 1, that you're reporting everything in CMDC so CDE can see that you're spending those funds down. Right. We already mentioned equitable services. The application includes identification of the schools that are participating next year. So you should have consulted with all of them and have affidavits on file for all of those schools that you've had consultation. Okay. Yes, the CONAP will not be open until after July. And if you didn't get that notice, you need to go in and sign up to be on their listserv, because you're not if you didn't get that. So it's really important. All right, one more thing that's important and that I just want to give you a heads up on the next slide. Okay, and we just learned this, and hopefully CDE is going to come up with a fix, but it has to do with federal transferability, and this could have implications for your Title II and IV funds. As you know, you can transfer funds out of or into Title II and Title IV. Those can go in or out, but you can transfer them only into Title I and Title III. Okay. In the winter consolidated application, you indicate if you're transferring funds, and you do those pages that show transferability. Okay. Transferability, though, that's just notifying CDE that you're doing it. Transferability takes place at the local level. So those funds have to come to the district, and then you have to transfer them. You've notified CDE you're doing it. This has not been made clear to the field. And the concern is that those Title IV, if you transferred Title IV or Title II funds to another program and you think you're spending them, but it's not showing up on the CDE website, then you need to go into CMDC and report those as Title IV expenditures. This is incredibly confusing and above my brain, so I have given you the contact person to contact there. But I went in and looked, and a lot of our districts have remaining balances in 1920 and 2021 Title IV funds. I just did a quick look, and it looks like a lot of you still have money left that's got to be spent by September 30th. So you want to check that. If you think your Title IV funds, you transferred them, but if their CDE is still showing them as unspent, I would recommend that you contact Leslie Sharp at CDE and ask her what you need to do to make sure those funds are showing as spent. In other words, if you have to transfer them, the district has to put them in CMDC, showing them as Title IV funds, but you are allowed to spend them in the other programs. So kind of confusing. Sorry about that. This just kind of came out. I am hoping and guessing CDE may come up with a fix that will support, because there are a lot of districts out there with unspent Title IV, particularly funds. And yeah, Title IV and Title 2 and 4, you can transfer Title 2 and Title 4 in between each other. You can, but the only ones you can't transfer out are Title 1 and Title 3. But I would say talk to your business office, make sure that you're showing your Title 4 and Title 2. Some of you, more people transferred Title 4 funds, I think. If you said you transferred the Title 4 funds, look in the CDA website, talk to your business office, make sure those funds are showing as being expended. If they aren't, looks like you're going to need July 1, go into CMDC and make sure that you show them as expended, even though you expended them in one of the other titles. But I would highly recommend you talk to Leslie Sharp. She's in CDE Fiscal. She primarily works with Title I, but she's very familiar with the this Title IV issue, and talked to her yesterday and said, can people call you? And she said, absolutely. Give her, shoot her an email, and she can help you out to see if there's any issues. But that just applies to those of you who took advantage of that transferability. All right, sorry to leave you with that one. I think that is it. And that is goodbye for the year. I am so sad we're not going to see you, but hopefully we will see you in LCAP land maybe, or we'll be sending out that survey and looking at your needs and seeing what kind of summer support we can provide. We're here all summer. Nobody's going anywhere. We're doing LCAP. So we'll be around if you have questions, concerns. Please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be getting a schedule out to you for next month's meetings. Once we take a look at your surveys, please send us any thoughts about how we can improve our services for you. We're here to serve you. And that's what we're all about. So please don't hesitate to let us know if there's something we can do to make life easier for you and better for you out there. So take care. We will get the FAQs out to you as soon as possible. And the harder your questions, the longer it takes, but we want to get it right. So please, hopefully you have get some rest in the next few months, fingers crossed. And thank you so much for all you do for the kids who need you so much. Take care. Just